So a couple more things here, and then we're almost done, I promise, because I know this section it's not my favorite to teach, and I know it's definitely not your favorite to learn by any means. So when we're talking about this title assurance, yet again, attorneys do the title searches in North Carolina. Attorneys are typically, sometimes some states use title insurance companies or title companies, but we use attorneys to do our title searches. We as real estate brokers don't do them. And I don't know how testable it is, but this second bullet point right here says abstract of title. That is a terminology for everything they found. So when they do their title search, they will actually put a summary on a sheet of paper called an abstract of title. And so it shows all the conveyances for the past 30 years, any liens that they found. It's just a sheet of everything that they've looked up. And then, as I told you, that North Carolina Marketable Title Act, we only do title searches back 30 years. Anything older than that is extinguished. We say it's an invalid claim. We don't have to worry about it. So that's why we don't go any back further back than 30. So here's where I'll give you the. Oh, I'm sorry, Bill. What you got?
So is it 30 years from the last deed or 30 years from the date something is found?
It is 30 years from the date of closing. They go back 30 years from that date that you were anticipating to close on the property. So, like, if we were set to close, today, November 4th of 2024, they would look back on November 4th all the way back of, 30 years ago. What is that, 1994 or whatever that would be, right? Yeah. So here's where I'm going to warn you of something, folks. I keep saying don't confuse title assurance with title insurance. And this is where you got to be careful. There are 3 different types of insurances that are testable in this class. Title insurance is an insurance policy that protects your concept of ownership, that title. Not to be confused with hazard insurance, or also called homeowners insurance, which protects your dwelling, the structure. Not to be confused with mortgage insurance, which protects the lender in case you default if you are a higher risk borrower. So there are 3 different types of insurances that are testable. Now, the other thing that's very unique about title insurance, especially compared to other insurances, most insurance, you pay monthly premiums, and your insurance covers if something happens, right? Automobile insurance covers if you get in a car accident. Medical insurance covers if you get sick, so on and so forth. Title insurance differs greatly because there is no monthly premium. It is a one-time premium paid at closing. The other reason it's different than all other insurances is because it does not cover things that could happen. It only covers things that have already happened. In other words, if there was something not discovered in that title search that pops up in the past, it will cover that. But if something new causes a title defect down the future, it's not covering that. It only covers past events, not new things. Another important thing to note about title insurance is when we talked about a survey, a licensed surveyor doing a survey is the only way to find things like encroachments and easements and whether or not you have public right-of-way access and, if you're in floodplains and all that fun-filled jazz. So are you legally required to have a survey in North Carolina? No. Is it a good idea? Yeah, especially when you consider that if you elect to not have a survey, and I said this before, if you elect to not have a survey, but having a survey would have discovered a title defect, your title insurance policy is not going to cover it. It's kind of a big significant thing there, both for the real world and potentially from a testable point of view. Now, if you are borrowing money, there is a borrower's policy and a lender's policy. Now, the borrower pays both. The lender's like, well, hey, listen, we're lending you all this money to buy the property, so you pay for our title insurance policy as well. Of course, as the homeowner, the borrower, your policy would go until you sold the property. The lender's policy would run until you paid off the home. So if you paid it off in 15 years, their policy expires at that point. Yours would keep going, though. What you got, Beverly?
How would a survey uncover like defects or you know in a title?
The legal descriptions could have been off.
Uh,
Yeah. So the survey goes out and finds the meets and bounds legal description as it's being conveyed to you. Turns out it's off by 100 feet and you only own half of what you think you own because it was not in the previous deed. It was written as, this measurement, but then the next measurement was off and nobody ever caught it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Then couldn't you file for a deed of correction to correct said error?
No, well, it depends. If that was a typographical error, that's one thing. But if it was a conveyance error where somebody did not have the legal right to convey that property to you, right? That they basically conveyed property to you that they didn't own, that's a big title defect. Because, maybe for the past 15 years, everybody thought their property was, 3.6 acres. Turns out there was an incorrect conveyance because somebody who didn't legally have the right to convey it tried to, and you only have 1.2 acres. It's a big title defect. And that's not something you can just correct. That'd be a suit to quiet title.
But wouldn't we go back to, I think it was last week, when it was, like, say you've had this piece of property, or you thought it was yours and you've been using it as yours for, like, 20 years? Wouldn't that...
That's adverse possession if you were going to try to claim it as your own, but I said 15 years, so that wouldn't meet that criteria. Now, once again, there's potential for 7 years, so it would really depend, right, Brooks? I mean, it's a possibility that you could claim it as your own, or if this incorrect thing was older than 30, you may be legally owning it because we're going to extinguish that claim, and, nobody's ever contested the fact that you owned it, so, that's why there's attorneys. This stuff can get pretty complicated sometimes. Yeah. So, title insurance, let me just say it one more time, does not protect the structure in any way, shape, or form. Okay? It doesn't protect your house, doesn't protect if it catches on fire, doesn't protect if it floods. It protects your concept of ownership. The title, this theory that you are the owner, is what it protects. Title insurance. I know, it's weird. It's weird. Paige, why do I feel like you're judging me right now? You just have that look on your face. Like, are you judging me right now, Paige?
I'm not judging you now.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna ask her brother. Is she lying? She looks like she's judging me.
No, she's not. I know she's lying.
Okay, well, listen, there you go. Parker's got your back. There you go. Folks, let's just rehash this one more time, okay? Connor Act deals with recordation, okay? It's this legal law, redundant. It's this law that states you probably need to record certain things to protect your interest from third-party claims, creditors, debtors, other people, fraudulent activities, right? Record it to protect yourself. Statute of frauds says certain things need to be in writing to make them enforceable in a court of law. And I told you the lists are the exact same. Deeds, contracts for the sale of real property, leases in excess of 3 years, restrictive covenants, promissory notes, things of that nature. Okay, but understand, Connor Act says recorded to protect yourself from all parties. Statute of fraud says writing to be able to take the other party to court, right? Enforceable in a court of law. Some of these are just duplicated so many times in here that we just don't need to go over it in that much detail. I've already talked about recordation. And I also mentioned satisfactions or mortgage payoffs. Folks, I told you we can't delete anything. So when you've got a mortgage or a deed of trust recorded against the property, you can't delete it. So you record a new document called a satisfaction or a deed reconveyance, something like that. And so that just basically says, well, hey, remember that lien we had that said we could go after the property? Here's another document we're recording that says we don't have the right to do that anymore. It's called a deed reconveyance or a satisfaction. They both just kind of Say it's Dunsies. Here's the thing. I'm about to introduce something to you, okay? Let me give you a little word of caution. It's math, okay? But listen, it is the easiest math in the entire curriculum. If you listen to what I'm about to warn you on, okay? It is called excise tax. Now listen very carefully. I have already taught you real property tax math. This is something different. Real property taxes are paid to your local municipalities every single year. Remember, the tax rate can change every year for real property taxes, but then we had that mandatory octennial reassessment or reappraisal every 8 years, and then, of course, that horizontal reassessment that could happen every 4 years. But that's real property taxes. This is excise tax. Excise tax is also referred to as transfer tax or revenue stamps. Basically, it's a tax that you pay the state of North Carolina when you transfer title to property. And the way that they calculate this is you owe the state $1 per $500 of purchase price. See the difference here? Excise tax will always be based on purchase price. Real property tax, as we said, always based on assessed value. So, let me get my calculator out here and show you a few things. If the property was selling for $500,000, all you do is you take your purchase price and you divide it by 500, and that tells you your excise tax because you owe $1 per $500 worth of purchase price. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. But, listen very carefully. There is something very special that happens with this, and you've got to remember it or you will screw it up on the test. They will not accept any change. I want you to think of it this way, okay? It's the government charging you this tax, and the government ain't got no sense, and they don't want none, okay? Now listen, let's say that you had some crazy arbitrary number like $425,321. Okay, is that a normal sales price? No. Could it happen? Sure. So if you take that sales price and divide by 500, you get some change. Folks, normal rounding rules do not apply here. They will never forgive the change, and they don't want it. So they say, give us the full dollar. So the answer for that sales price would be $8.51. Even if there was 1 penny, you've got to round up to the next full dollar. And this is the only time rounding will screw you up on the test, because I promise you, 851 and 850.64 are both going to be answer choices. I promise you they are. I know, Raphael, it's cruel, isn't it? Cold-blooded. But you see, otherwise, like, this is very easy math. Purchase price divided by 500. And if there's any change, give them the next dollar. So if it was $235,623 for the purchase price divided by 500, 24 cents, round up still. The answer is $4.72. Excise tax. A lot of people are always like, oh, so this is like a sales tax. No, don't think of it that way, because sales tax is paid by the person buying the item. This is always paid by default by the seller too, okay? So that's another thing to be aware of. The default is the seller pays this. So this would be what we call a seller debit. Remember, we introduced those debits and credits. Debit is you're paying it. So excise tax by default is a seller debit. Now, to that point, kind of said this before, there's a default to everything that you're going to be tested on more than anything. But could we negotiate that the buyer was paying the excise tax? Sure. I'm going to pick on new construction again. Builders love to sneak it in the contract that you as the buyer has to pay the excise tax. The builder doesn't ever pay it. They sneak their way out of it. But in a resale transaction, defaults to the seller paying this, okay? So the default for excise tax is a seller debit. So here's just another visual example. If we had a sales price of $249,750, take your sales price, divided by 500, that'd be $499.50, but that's not the answer. It'd be $500. Always round up, 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 up. So if there's change, right? You don't round up if it's a whole number. Just be very careful because different types of tax here. So, let me clarify one thing, and then I'll probably go down maybe a little bit of a math tangent for just a second, just to kind of ease you into some of the prorations. It's not going to be the crazy in-depth discussion on it yet, but let me explain what you're looking at here. This is another one of those things that I like to refer to as a misnomer, because as I told you on day one, everybody calls real estate professionals, right? Realtors, brokers, real estate agents. And they all technically mean something different. And even real estate agents will say, well, I've got a settlement meeting, or I've got a closing, right? A lot of us will use those terms interchangeably. For the sake of this class, think of settlement as the meeting where everybody goes to sign the paperwork. Closing, you should think of when the deed's recorded. Because I told you, we don't really consider you the owner until the deed's been recorded. So we don't get paid when everybody goes and signs the paperwork. We get paid when the deed's been recorded, when it's closed. Okay, that's when all the monies get dispersed. So the seller gets their money, the agents get their money, that's where all that kind of happens. So settlement, think the meeting where parties go to sign the documents. Closing, when the deed has actually been recorded in the name of the grantee. Bree's question was, are negotiations common with new builds, or is it kind of, you get what you get? Negotiations are absolutely common. It's on what you can ask for and what you can get out of people. Antonia says, are excise tax math questions also listed in the practice section? Yes, they're on the math packet as well. And then the attorney is the one who records the deed. There you go. Let me show you, folks, since you asked about the math packet. Let me see if I still got it pulled up here. Yeah. Just real quick, let's practice like 2 excise tax questions, because I'm not really super concerned with those. And then let me kind of show you a little bit of settlement stuff here. Just do this one. That's wonky. Number 3 here. So, looks like a lot of you are having a consensus over there in the chat. 239,900 purchase price divided by 500 gives you 479.80, but that is not the answer. You would have to go up to 480. How about number 4 here? do that one. Just make sure y'all are good. And just know, too, that this is another prime example of we're going to give you a crap ton of information. You've got to know what to ignore. So we'll say something like a home was purchased for, or listed, better yet, it'll say home was listed for $380,000. It closed for $400,000. Its loan amount was $320,000. It's, you know, it's going to give you all these different numbers, and it's going to say, well, what's the excise tax? And you've got to know that out of these 4 different numbers I just gave you, you've got to pick what it closed for, right? What it was actually purchased for. And so for this one, 750,435 divided by 500 gives us 1,587 cents, but that's not the answer. The answer is 1,501. So let me just introduce, because I told you I wasn't teaching it to you last week, but I kind of want to introduce it now because, of course, the class is going to speed up and I don't want to forget it. And so I think while we're talking about settlement statements, it's good to introduce some of the practice prorations, because it's just like it's one piece of the puzzle, if you will, for a much more complicated math question you will get down the road. You're not ready for it yet, but let's talk about the proration math that I showed you but didn't teach you, folks. Remember, I told you when we're dealing with prorations, it's all about making it fair, because especially when we're dealing with tax bills, they are annual tax bills, and so of course buyer is going to have some responsibility for part of it, seller is going to have some responsibility for part of it. And so when we're dealing with taxes, I told you there's really 3 possible outcomes for taxes. If we're closing earlier in the year prior to what date? What did I say as the default in North Carolina? When do we consider the taxes due and payable in North Carolina? There you go. Bree put in the chat, September 1. So, and this is where I'm going to kind of remind you of the dangers with these math questions. Remember, all of the math is on the national portion. And so while there's defaults in North Carolina, every state kind of does things differently for taxes. And so if we don't tell you anything other than something like this, right? Property is assessed at $160,000 and is closing February 15th with a tax rate of $1.10 per 100. How will taxes be handled at closing? Well, folks, all you have is what you have. And if I've given you no other information and it's closing before September 1, assume that the normal default is going to happen, which means who will be paying the tax bill in this fictitious scenario? The buyer. That's exactly right. The buyer. The buyer will be paying it sometime later in the year because the tax bill is not going to be due and payable till September 1. Can we agree? The seller is going to be long gone by September 1. And so the buyer is going to be paying the full tax bill. So how do we make this fair on a closing disclosure? How do we make this right, which is the settlement statement?
Prorate the number of days that they'll have possession in the year, and divide the annual tax by that number.
Yeah, there you go. We're going to multi-step process here. And you're exactly right, mathematically speaking. A couple other people put in the chat too that we're going to debit the seller and we're going to credit the buyer, and that's exactly right. We've got to figure out how much to take from the seller, and when we take it from them, we're going to give it to the buyer. And that's going to make it fair because that means that later in the year when the buyer swipes their card, like going out to eat for the full amount, they got the portion of what the seller ate. Now, Bill said, do we use 360 or 365? This worksheet is based on 360. So if you look at the answer key, it's going to be based off that. But we will potentially practice both. And so remember what you're going to do. Step 1, let's just work through it piece by piece. Step 1, calculate the tax bill for me. Seeing some consistency in the chat, which is typically good. So the tax bill, I told you there's more than one way to tackle it. And so I told you personally my preferred method, right? Because this is a per 100 rate. If you just take your per 100 rate, which is $1.10 per 100, and you divide it by 100, and folks, I mean, if you look at it, like it's kind of telling you what to do, right? Divided by 100, if you think of that as a division symbol. And now you've converted it to a per dollar rate. So what this is stating is you owe the tax assessor 0.011 cents per dollar of assessed value. So take it and multiply it by your assessed value of 160,000 for 1760. So this is a multi-step problem. So that is our annual tax bill. So let's do the 360-day method, folks. You need to figure out the per diem. How much would somebody owe per day? So take the annual tax bill divided by 360. Tell me what you get. So your annual tax bill of 1760 divided by 360. And understand too that I told you this worksheet is designed around 3 decimal places. So in order to match up to the answer key, the answer would probably be 4.889. It will never come down to rounding. We're not going to 3 decimal places on the test, but technically I think that's how this one is built out. Personally, I would just say 4.89, so that's what we're going to do. So I like to just deal with real change, real world concepts. So this is your per diem, right? How much somebody is responsible for per day. And now we need to figure out the seller's days. And so remember, the default is the seller gets the day of closing. Well, that means the seller is responsible for January 1 up through and including February 15th. How many days is that? I got to be careful because it's all or nothing. Because we're doing the 360-day year, that means that every single month also has 30 days, right? If we're defaulting 360-day a year, 30-day month. If we're doing real calendar, then you would have to do real calendar. But we're doing the 360-day year. So that means the seller is responsible for all of January. And in this fictitious methodology, January has 30 days. All months have 30 days. And then in February, they've got 15 days. And so it would be 45 days using this method. Now, of course, if we were using 365, it'd be different. So make sure you're careful here. So I told you, I hate the fact that they make you do both. It makes no sense. Like, just rip the Band-Aid and make you only do 365. But I don't make the rules. I just work here. I don't know. So now you got 45 days. And we're going to multiply that by our per diem of $4.89 a day. Now, here's the thing, folks. This is not an answer, and it will never be enough for an answer because you've got to formulate it into debits and credits. That is how these questions are going to look. So you've got to tell me, now that we found this number, who are we debiting, who are we crediting? What does that look like? There you go, Janet. That's what this looks like. Debit the seller $220.05, Credit the buyer 220.05. That's the answer. You cannot just say 220.05. You cannot just say credit the seller. You've got to say it. Debit the seller, take money from them, credit the buyer. And so that would be your answer. 220.05 seller debit, 220.05 buyer credit. And so if you look down here at the multiple choice ones, you kind of see what I mean here. And they will give you, yet again, the backwards one as an answer choice. So you've got to make sure you know who is being debited, who is being credited. And understand that in most of these prorations, right, if the buyer's paying later in the year, then we debit the seller, credit the buyer. If the seller is already paid, then what happens? If the seller has already paid the taxes for the full year, then what happens? There you go. If the seller's already paid the full tax bill, that's not really fair to them. So we would now debit the buyer and reimburse the seller, right? It's buyer debit, seller credit, because they've already paid the full tax bill. And so in both of these scenarios we just talked about, the number is the same. We're taking from one, giving to the other. But there is a third scenario. Remember, if we're closing after September 1, it's considered due and payable, and if it's not been paid, the attorney's not going to leave well enough alone. They're going to say, well, let's pay it at closing. And that's a double debit. We take the seller's portion from the seller, we take the buyer's portion from the buyer, and because of the time frame that this would be after September 1 only, it will always be a different number when we're doing a double debit. Because we're not taking from one and giving to the other. Does this make sense? We're taking the seller's portion, which is the vast majority, and buyer's portion, which is lesser, because September 1 is many months into the year. So let me give you one to practice here, all on your own. And you can handle it. I'm not going to give you a multiple choice one yet. Do this one right here. Number 2. Just for clarity, using 360 days again.
We are using 365 days or 360?
360.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Let's go over it. I always like once I start seeing like it's several different answers, I'm like, okay, let's touch on. There's some right answers out there, but folks, you've got to just take it a step at a time. Okay. So first things first, we've got to find the tax bill. So the property is assessed for $350,000 and is closing on December 15th. Taxes have already been paid with a tax rate of 75 cents per 100. How will they be handled at closing? Okay, well, you've got your per 100 rate of 75 cents. So 75 cents divided by 100 gives you your per dollar rate times your assessed value of 350,000 gives us a tax bill as a starting point of 2,625. Everybody cool with the tax bill? Okay. And so we're doing the 360-day method, so we can just go ahead and say, okay, well, this annual tax bill divided by 360 gives us our per diem. How much would somebody have to pay per day? And we'll do $7.29 a day. Everybody still good? Now here's where some of you messed up. You've got to understand exactly what's happening here. The taxes have already been paid. That means all $2,625 have been paid by the seller. But the seller is not responsible for the entire year because it will stop being their house on December 16th. The seller is responsible for January 1 up to including December 15th, right? Because we default to the seller gets the day of closing for taxes, rents, and HOA dues. What you got, Cheyenne?
Where I was wrong was I guess I got 109.5, but that's because I rounded that. I did 730 a day. So like even that like screwed me up.
Yeah, and it'll never come down to like there's not going to be two answers that are like that close on the test.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm like, if it comes down to cents, like,
It's not. No, the only thing that will ever come down to rounding excise tax that we just went over. So don't let that freak you out.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, we are not supposed to round the numbers in the tax, correct? Yeah.
I always just leave it at 2 decimal places because that's real change. We don't deal with fictitious cents, right? Fractions of cents. Yeah, so for the test too. So here's the thing. The seller already paid the full tax bill, so we need to reimburse the seller for the portion that they weren't responsible for. Well, that means that in December, the buyer is responsible. Now, here's the easiest way to calculate this, folks. Now, this one's pretty straightforward, but when you're dealing with the buyer, just take 30 days that December has and subtract out the days that are the sellers. In this case, 15. Now, obviously, I told you this one's a halvesies one, so you could do it without doing the calculator. But if it was like 7 days, 27 days, take your 30, subtract the days that are the sellers, that gives you everything that's the buyers when it's a little more complicated. So 15 days that the buyer is responsible for, the 16th, 17th, 18th, right through the 30th. Because we're in this fictitious 30-day year, okay? New Year's Eve doesn't exist in this fictitious world. So 15 days times your $7.29 a day. Oops. Gives you $109.35 depending on how you rounded. But folks, you've got to understand that's not an answer. Because the question is, well, how's this going to look on a closing disclosure? That's just a number. And so we are taking that amount of money, debiting the buyer $109.35, and we are giving that money to the seller, crediting the seller $109.35. We are robbing Peter to pay Paul. What you got, Sergio?
So even though they paid the taxes on September 1st, we wouldn't go from that date?
No, because it's an annual tax bill. Don't ever prorate. Listen, September 1 is only significant to tell us whether the taxes are due or not in North Carolina. That's the only thing. You are always prorating for the entire year. It's an annual tax bill.
So that's why you only did from December 1st to the 15th, basically.
No, December. No. I was only concerned about December 16th through the 30th because the seller owned it from January 1 all the way up until December 15th. So
what I'm-
they had almost the entire year.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's the 16th, 17th, 18th, right? December 16th through 30th is the only thing that the seller shouldn't be responsible for because it'll be the buyer's house at that point. And so we've got to reimburse them for the buyer's portion. That was the going out to eat analogy that I gave you, right? If you and I went out to eat together, you don't want to pay for what I ate, right? So even if you swipe your card for the full bill, let me reimburse you to make it fair. Yeah, I mean this is an annual tax bill. Everybody kind of see where they made some little mistakes there. Let's give you another one. And as I said, this is not like you got to be an expert on this tonight. I just want to make sure you kind of start grasping this concept as we move into other things. There we go. Let's do number 3 because number 3 throws another wrench in the system. So this one right here. Read it carefully. Make sure you understand what it's asking. Give it a spin, Ben. Give you just another moment, and we'll go over it. So, first and foremost, with this being week 3, I'm sure y'all have probably already figured out how much my soul dies having to sit there quietly for that long period of time. I can't do it. It just hurts myself. You know, I'm just loud and obnoxious by nature. When I have to sit there quietly, just bleh. But I do it because I gotta give you time to practice it, okay? Don't say I never did nothing for you, but I don't like being quiet. So here's the deal, folks. Multi-step math problem yet again, okay? Closing is set for October 30th. Taxes will be paid at closing for a property in the county assessed at $65,000. The city tax rate is 35 cents per 100 and the county tax rate is 70 cents per 100. Now, of course, this is one of those tricky ones where all it says is in the county. So that means ignore the city tax rate. You're not using that one. So first and foremost, find the tax bill. 70 cents per 100 is your tax rate for the county. So 70 cents divided by 100 gives you your per dollar rate. Per dollar rate times your assessed value of $65,000 should be a tax bill of only $455. Okay, pretty small tax bill that we're dealing with here. Everybody's still okay so far? So this is where I would suggest going the path of least resistance, folks. Sometimes you got to count a lot of days depending on what you're trying to go for, or you could choose to count lesser days. And so one thing that some of you missed, and that's why I picked this one, taxes will be paid at closing. And so this is a double debit scenario. Remember when you go out to eat with somebody, I said you could put cash in the book. I put cash in the book. We both paid our portions. We're dunsies. That's what we're doing right here, right now. Now, there's a lot more days to count if you look for the seller, because the seller's responsible for January 1 all the way up through October 30th. I'd argue it's easier to just count the buyer's days. So the buyer is going to be responsible for all of December, all of November, and none of October, because there's only 30 days in each month, and the seller gets the day of closing. So that's 30 days, 30 days, 60 days for the buyer. Take your annual tax bill, divide it by 360 to get a per diem of $126 a day. And then once again, if you don't clear out your calculator, you're going to get a slightly different answer for rounding, but $1.26 times 60 days, buyer's portion, $75.60, depending on how you round it. So this would be a buyer debit of $75.60, but that's not the final answer, folks. The total tax bill of $455 has to be paid. Don't count the days. Everything that's not the buyer's is the seller's. $455 minus the buyer's portion of $75.60 gives us the seller's portion, seller debit, $379.40. This should total the total tax bill. The tax assessor wants all $455. Give me your portion buyer, give me your portion seller, double debit. And this is where the numbers have to be different. We're not robbing Peter to pay Paul. We're robbing Peter and Paul to pay the tax assessor. What you got, Brooks?
All right, so in questions like this, it will always say taxes will be closed at, or taxes to be paid at closing, right?
Yeah, if it's closing after, when we're giving you a closing after September 1, we have to tell you either they've already been paid or they will be paid. They have to give you that information.
Okay, so when it says they'll be paid at closing, is that an automatic clue as to a double debit or?
Yes, if they're going to be paid at closing, that is a double debit.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
I'm just trying to cheat my way through this math.
I hear you. I hear you, absolutely. And so, I mean, if the seller's already paid it, right, that means we got to reimburse the seller. But if it's being paid at closing, that is a double debit.
My hand and finding you updated Zoom.
Okay.
But in the last question, could you go back to it? Because I, where it says taxes will be paid at closing year, I don't know what it said on the last one.
And the last one, they were already paid by the seller.
Paid, okay.
Oh, wait, we were just doing, which one were we just doing? Property taxes have already been paid on the last one. And then taxes will be paid. That's the different language, right? Already been paid means the seller paid the entire tax bill on this one, so we got to reimburse them some money. Will be paid at closing means we're going to charge both the buyer and the seller for their respective portions. Yep.
So we need to calculate the tax rate, right? We have to add the city tax rate plus and county tax plus, correct?
Not on this one because it says in the county. It is not located in the city. So you've got to ignore the city tax rate. If it was located in the city limits, you would have had to do both.
Oh, profit in the county.
Mm-hmm.
City tax.
Yep, there you go.